This man was one of the DEA's most famous and most powerful agents, Darnell Garcia. He was known for his precision, for his ability to take down the most dangerous drug cartels operating across the United States and Mexico. He was trusted to protect the public, a man who wore his badge with pride. But what no one knew was that Garcia had a dark secret. For years, while hunting down drug lords, he was quietly stealing millions in cash and cocaine from the very criminals he was sworn to bring to justice. And it didn't stop there. Garcia built an empire of his own. He started reselling the very drugs he was seizing. No one saw it coming. This agent had transformed into a kingpin, using his position to stay one step ahead of everyone. So, who was this man? And how did someone sworn to uphold the law become its greatest enemy? What drove him to betray everything he once stood for? This is the story of the DEA agent who fooled everyone, the man who built an empire of greed and deception from within. Long before Darnell's name became synonymous with corruption, with millions of dollars in international manhunts, he was something else entirely, a respected officer. A man who seemed destined for greatness in law enforcement. Garcia's story didn't start with crime. It started with promise. Born and raised in New York City, his early life was defined by discipline. He served 3 years in the Army during the Vietnam War, a period that shaped his sense of duty and sharpened his ambition. When he left the military, Garcia moved to Los Angeles. It was a city full of opportunity, and for someone like him, the perfect place to build a career. But it wasn't just the badge that made Garcia stand out. He had another talent, one that would take him from the streets of LA to the world of martial arts, and even Hollywood. Under the mentorship of the legendary Chuck Norris, Garcia didn't just train, he excelled. He became a champion, competing in tournaments, and eventually winning titles on the martial arts circuit. His reputation grew, not just as an athlete, but as a man with unmatched drive. By the early 1970s, Garcia's name was well known in martial arts circles, and that success led to something few could have predicted. Hollywood came calling. In 1973, Garcia landed a role in Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, one of the most iconic martial arts films of all time. But even as Garcia flirted with stardom, his true ambition lay elsewhere. His calling wasn't the silver screen, it was law enforcement. After his brief Hollywood stint, Garcia joined the LAPD. He brought with him the discipline of a soldier, the confidence of a fighter, and a hunger to rise. It didn't take long for him to make a name for himself. His rise was fast. He had a talent for handling high-pressure situations, a deep understanding of LA's dangerous streets, and a charisma that set him apart. Street smart, ambitious, respected. Soon, his skills caught the attention of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. In 1978, Garcia made the jump. It was a prestigious move. The DEA was the elite force in America's war on drugs. More responsibility, more power, and for Garcia, more opportunity. With his charm, experience, and reputation for results, he quickly became a rising star. He earned the trust of colleagues and the admiration of superiors. By the late 70s, Darnell Garcia had what most agents dreamed of: respect, a steady career, and the authority of a DEA badge. But as the years passed, the reality of the job began to wear on him. The long hours, the danger, the pressure. Fighting drug cartels in Los Angeles felt like a thankless task. Garcia was good at his job, maybe one of the best, but his paycheck never reflected it. He risked his life every day, while the drug lords he was chasing lived like kings: mansions, luxury cars, endless cash. And Garcia? He could barely keep up with the cost of living in LA. In a city of wealth and glamour, Garcia couldn't ignore the disparity. He'd drive past Beverly Hills estates on his way to raid drug dens in South Central. The contrast was brutal, and one question burned in his mind. Why did the people poisoning the streets get to live in comfort, while men like him struggled to survive? It wasn't just the injustice, it was the money. Millions of dollars were seized in DEA operations. Cash stacked high, bagged, tagged, and locked away as evidence. But Garcia started to notice something. Not all of it was being tracked. Not all of it was accounted for. The system had flaws, and those flaws opened the door to temptation. It started small, a single raid in South Central. Amid the chaos, Garcia found himself alone, with a bag full of seized cash. No one was watching. No one would miss a few $100s. In that moment, he made a choice, one that would change his life forever. He pocketed a few bills, just a couple hundred, convincing himself it was fair payment for the risks he took. But what seemed harmless quickly evolved. A few hundred turned into 1,000. One time became every time. And Garcia justified it all. He wasn't stealing from innocent people. He was taking from criminals. People who didn't deserve the money in the first place. And besides, didn't he deserve it more than anyone? With every raid, new opportunities came. His position gave him access to millions in untraceable cash. And soon, skimming became part of his routine. He no longer saw the money as evidence. He saw it as a resource, there for the taking. In his mind, it wasn't even wrong anymore. The system was corrupt. The city was corrupt. He was just taking his cut, and the more he got away with it, the more bold he became. But this was just the beginning. For Darnell Garcia, skimming cash wasn't enough anymore. He saw the bigger picture. The drugs seized in these raids, they were worth far more than the money left behind. And with the right plan, they could be turned into millions. He wasn't going to do it alone. Garcia brought in 2 trusted colleagues, fellow DEA agents Ed Williams and Brian Harford. Men who had seen the same temptations, the same opportunity. Together, they formed a tight circle, bound by greed and secrecy, and with their badges they had the perfect cover. They were the law, and the law wasn't supposed to be questioned. It started during routine raids. Garcia, Williams, and Harford began targeting operations where large quantities of drugs, especially cocaine, were being seized. After every bust, they'd take a portion for themselves. They knew the system better than anyone. And with their experience, hiding the theft wasn't hard. Their method was simple, almost elegant. They'd take the cocaine, replace it with baking soda, and leave just enough real product behind so that DEA tests would never detect the switch. It was a foolproof system. Every test came back clean. Every report was filed without question. To their colleagues and superiors, Garcia and his team were still just DEA agents doing their jobs. But in reality, they were siphoning off thousands of dollars worth of cocaine in plain sight. The temptation had evolved into something much bigger. They were no longer just stealing cash. They were running their own narco operation. As the months passed, their greed only grew. Small amounts turned into entire kilos. They weren't just dipping into local dealer stashes anymore. They were slicing off major busts, stockpiling cocaine, and selling it back on the streets through trusted connections. With Garcia at the helm, their operation ran like a business. His old contacts from his time as an undercover agent now became critical assets. The same criminals he had once taken down were now helping him move the very drugs he was supposed to seize. The line between cop and criminal? It no longer existed. But for Garcia, this wasn't just about money. It was about control, power. and the more he took, the more invincible he felt. He had mastered the system, played both sides, and no one suspected a thing. Soon, it wasn't just cash and cocaine flowing through their hands. It was millions of dollars. The profits were unimaginable, far beyond anything they had ever expected, and Garcia knew those profits had to be protected. Hidden. They needed safety, secrecy. So they turned to the safest place they could think of: Swiss bank accounts. Garcia, Williams, and Harford began funneling money into secret accounts overseas: Switzerland, Luxembourg. Anywhere the cash could be stored out of reach. The money was laundered, moved across borders, disguised beneath layers of international secrecy. The DEA couldn't find it. The FBI couldn't trace it. No one even knew it was missing. What had started with a few $100s skimmed off the top had now become millions, spread across multiple countries. Garcia wasn't just a rogue agent anymore. He was operating like the criminals he once hunted, only smarter, more careful, more strategic. And with each success, his arrogance grew. He believed he had outsmarted the system entirely, that there was no one who could stop him, no one who could see past the badge. As far as Garcia was concerned, he was untouchable. For a while, he was right. The operation ran like clockwork. Drugs were stolen, money was laundered, profits kept flowing. But secrets don't stay buried forever. The bigger the scheme grew, the more attention it attracted. And soon, that attention came from within Garcia's own agency. By the mid-1980s, whispers began to circulate inside the DEA. Unexplained gaps in evidence logs, financial irregularities, and most notably, Garcia's sudden lifestyle changes. He had always kept a low profile. Now, he wasn't hiding it so well. And so, quietly, an internal investigation began. At first, they found nothing solid. Garcia knew how the system worked. He had helped build it. Every dollar, every gram of cocaine, every false report, all expertly covered. Polygraph tests were administered to several agents, including Garcia. He refused, citing his rights, brushing off allegations as personal attacks. He knew the playbook. He'd used it for years to catch criminals. Now he was using it to protect himself. He was always one step ahead. He knew where they'd look, which records they'd scrutinize. And he had already taken steps to make sure they found nothing. But suspicion is a powerful thing, and once that seed of doubt is planted, it grows. The investigation deepened. Agents began monitoring his bank accounts, tracking his transactions, watching his every move. They couldn't catch him red-handed yet, but the cracks were forming. And then they got the break they'd been waiting for. In 1986, 2 local drug dealers were arrested by the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. A routine bust, nothing special, until the dealers started talking. Under interrogation, they revealed their drug supply came from a surprising source: inside law enforcement. Specifically, a man named Brian Harford, one of Garcia's closest partners. Now, the DEA had something real. They knew who Harford was, and they knew he was working with Garcia. The dealer's statements led investigators straight to the heart of the operation. Surveillance was immediately ramped up. Garcia, Harford, and Williams were now being watched around the clock. Every phone call, every meeting, every trip, all of it, recorded, analyzed, watched. And it was then, with the DEA closing in, that Garcia's house of cards began to wobble. What had once seemed like a flawless criminal enterprise was now under intense scrutiny. The very agency he had outsmarted for years was tightening the noose. Every move was being tracked, and Garcia knew he couldn't afford a single mistake. The investigation was uncovering more than just whispers, financial records that didn't add up, surveillance footage linking Garcia to known traffickers, and eventually, direct ties to the very narcotics they had stolen. Garcia's arrogance had protected him for a long time, but now it was becoming his weakness. He believed he was too clever to get caught, that his knowledge of the system would always protect him. But the truth was clear. It was only a matter of time before the walls collapsed. By November 1988, the DEA was ready. Months of surveillance, mounting evidence. Every piece was in place to arrest Darnell Garcia. But Garcia, always one step ahead, wasn't going down that easily. Just hours before the DEA was set to strike, Garcia got a call. Not from a partner, not from an accomplice, but from someone on the inside, his girlfriend. She worked at the LA County Courthouse. She had seen the arrest warrants and she knew what was coming. With that one phone call, Garcia's world changed. He didn't have much time, but it was enough. Enough to disappear. Garcia didn't panic. He was too seasoned for that. He had prepared for this moment. After years of living a double life, he had an exit plan. The moment he hung up, he went into motion. Within hours, he was gone. Los Angeles left behind. The DEA left empty-handed. When agents stormed his house, all they found were traces of the life he once lived. Photos of fast cars, exotic vacations, and a lifestyle built on crime. But the man himself vanished. For the DEA, it was a crushing blow. Years of work, and he had slipped through their fingers. But the chase wasn't over. It had just begun. For months, Darnell Garcia disappeared into the shadows. But he wasn't hiding in a jungle or mountain cave. He took his operation international, relying on the very thing he had built to protect himself. His network of secret bank accounts in Europe, Switzerland, Luxembourg. He knew these places well. That's where millions were waiting for him. And now, those hidden funds were his lifeline. But Garcia wasn't content to lie low forever. He still had money. And the thrill of the chase didn't scare him. He moved with calculated precision, using fake identities, carefully planned routes, and cash. And for a while, it worked. It looked like Garcia had escaped for good. For the next 7 months, he lived as a fugitive, traveling through Europe, always one step ahead. The DEA, now working with Interpol, tracked him. But catching him proved harder than ever. Still, Garcia's greatest flaw had always been his greed. In June 1989, he made a mistake, a small one, barely noticeable. But for a man who had lived with precision for so long, it was enough. He was hiding out in Luxembourg, where he had closed a Swiss account and withdrawn millions in cash stashed in plastic bags. But Garcia wanted more. He returned to a local travel agency to cash in a plane ticket he had bought long ago. The refund? Just $200. But the woman behind the counter recognized him. Something about him felt off. As Garcia waited, she quietly stepped away and made a call. Interpol was alerted. And they knew exactly who he was. After 7 months on the run, Garcia's arrogance had finally caught up with him. As he left the travel agency, Interpol agents were already nearby. They spotted him, calm, casual, unaware of what was coming. They moved in, guns drawn, hearts racing. Garcia didn't resist. He knew it was over. After years of running drugs, laundering millions, and outsmarting the very agency he had served, Darnell Garcia was finally caught. With him in custody, the process moved fast. Luxembourg authorities worked closely with U.S. officials. Garcia was transferred back to the United States under heavy guard. He was no longer the celebrated DEA agent, no longer the man with a badge. He was now a criminal, a traitor, and a prisoner. As the plane touched down on American soil, the gravity of his fall became clear. He had spent years believing he was untouchable. Now he was just another inmate. The millions in Swiss and Luxembourg banks? Useless. His aliases? Worthless. He was escorted off the plane in handcuffs, met by federal agents, many of whom had once worked beside him. But the road to justice wasn't simple. The case against Garcia was one of the most complex in DEA history. The investigation spanned years, involving multiple countries, secret accounts, and millions in laundered money. Prosecutors had a mountain of evidence: drug seizures, financial records, witness testimony. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Witness after witness took the stand. Some were old friends, men who once trusted Garcia with their lives. Others were DEA agents who had worked beside him, unaware of the betrayal. Their testimonies were damning. Then came the evidence: the falsified seizure reports, the bank records. The baking soda cocaine passed off as legitimate DEA product. But the most powerful testimony came from within his own circle. Ed Williams and Brian Harford, his partners in crime, took the stand. In exchange for reduced sentences, they told everything: how they stole drugs, how they laundered millions, how they sold cocaine back onto the very streets they swore to protect. They laid the entire operation bare. The trial dragged on for months, and with each day, Garcia's legacy crumbled further. The man, once seen as a hero, was now the face of betrayal. And in April 1991, the jury gave its verdict: guilty on all counts: drug trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering. The sentence was severe: 80 years in federal prison, a $1.6 million fine, and complete forfeiture of everything he had gained through his crimes. For Darnell Garcia, it was the ultimate downfall: the empire he built, gone; the fortune he stashed, seized; the reputation he earned, destroyed. He had spent years outsmarting the law. It was a story of how power, greed, and arrogance can turn a respected man into a legendary criminal. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe our channel,